Well, kia ora, good afternoon everyone. Tomorrow I'll be making a formal apology for the abuse that many New Zealanders suffered while in state and faith-based care. It will be a significant day in New Zealand's history and a very emotional one. The Royal Commission of Inquiry into Abuse in State Care was the largest, longest and most complex public inquiry ever held in New Zealand. Over 6 years, more than 2,400 survivors shared stories of the abuse that they suffered while in state care, churches and other faith-based places. Places where they should have been safe and treated with respect, dignity and compassion, but instead were subject to horrific abuse and neglect and in some cases torture. Since the report was tabled on the 24th of July, my ministers and I have been working our way through the 16 volumes comprising almost 3,000 pages, detailing the survivors' harrowing stories and the recommendations of the inquiry. Again, I do want to express my tremendous gratitude to those survivors who shared their stories. We will never lose sight of your bravery, and we will never forget what you endured. Today I want to provide you with an update on the Government's response to the Royal Commission of Inquiry report, which made 138 recommendations. Essentially, our response boils down to focus on three things. The first is acknowledging and formally apologising for the abuse. The second thing is to make sure that we support survivors. And thirdly, we must prevent abuse from occurring again. Tomorrow, our focus is solely on the apology. And we are expecting around 200 survivors at Parliament and a further 1,000 people watching via live stream events in Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch. And I know there is nothing I can do or say that will ever make up for what survivors endured. But I do hope that in some small way the apology might help with their healing. As we have said, the Government will progress further decisions on our response to the recommendations in the report throughout 2025. Including our plans around financial redress. But to demonstrate our commitment to change, an omnibus bill that will introduce a range of measures to improve the safety of children and vulnerable adults in state care will have its very first reading in Parliament tomorrow, immediately following the apology. Preventing abuse occurring in the future is a legacy that we owe survivors. And while there have been a number of improvements in state care, such as the introduction of professional standards, staff training and vetting, there is more we can and more that we must do. This is just the first step, and I would like to acknowledge other political parties for supporting the bill to have its first reading tomorrow. I'll now hand over to our lead Coordination Minister for the Government's response to the Royal Commission report, Erica Stanford, who will provide a little bit more detail on the Omnibus Bill.
Thank you, Prime Minister. The stories of thousands of brave survivors will forever be etched onto the pages of our history, and now it is on all New Zealanders to do all we can to ensure that that abuse should not have been accepted and to ensure that it no longer occurs. As the Prime Minister has set out, a priority of our overall response to the Royal Commission is the safety of young people in care today and also in the future. That will be the enduring legacy of survivors' contribution to changing the system. The Government has an ongoing commitment to implementing that change. Tomorrow the Government will introduce a range of legislative changes to better protect people in state care. The Responding to Abuse in Care Legislation Amendment Bill will have its first reading at 2 o'clock following the delivery of the National Apology. The bill includes a range of measures and makes changes to the Oranga Tamariki Act 1989, the Children's Act 2014, the Crimes Act 1961 and the Public Records Act of 2005. And I'd like to thank Minister Chaw, Minister Van Velden and Minister Goldsmith for their contributions to the bill. The bill will remove strip searches of young people in residential care and provide new search powers for people visiting youth justice facilities. It will address current gaps in the Children's Act by preventing people with overseas convictions associated with serious harm from working with children. It will amend the Crimes Act to include disability in the definition of a vulnerable adult. This will make it explicit that those that are caring for disabled adults owe them a statutory duty of care. The bill will also enforce better record keeping by government agencies. Many survivors have faced challenges accessing their records, and many records of care that were kept were inadequate or inaccurate. While there have been many improvements in state care, such as the introduction of professional standards, staff training and vetting, There is much more that we can do, that can be done, and the government will continue to carefully consider the Royal Commission's recommendations carefully and respectfully. Back to you, Prime Minister.
Thank you, Erica. But before we get into any questions, I'll just quickly run through the week ahead, as there's quite a lot going on. Obviously, Tuesday will be focused on the apology and the first reading of the Omnibus Bill. There will be no question time. On Wednesday, we have the second readings of the Smoke-Free Environments and Regulated Products Amendment Bill and the Residential Tenancy Amendment Bill. We also have the committee stage for the Building, Earthquake-Prone Building Deadlines and Other Matters Amendment Bill. And then on Thursday, there will be the first reading for the Treaty Principles Bill. And as you know, the government has a coalition agreement with ACT to support this bill at first reading to allow it to go to Select Committee. There is, however, no agreement to support the bill beyond that, and National will be voting it down at second reading. And unless opposition parties decide to vote in favour at second reading, that means the bill will end there. I'll be departing on Thursday afternoon for the annual APEC Economic Leaders meeting hosted this year in Lima, Peru, and then I'll be back in Wellington early on Monday morning. The APEC Summit is an opportunity to engage with regional counterparts on how we can drive more productive economies and how we might approach some of the global challenges that we are all navigating. The summit is a big deal for New Zealand, where 1 in 4 of our jobs depend on trade, and more than 3/4 of our exports are destined for APEC economies. As you know, our government is committed to doubling the value of our exports over 10 years as part of our plan to grow the economy, lift incomes for Kiwis and create jobs and opportunities, and removing economic barriers in the Asia Pacific is partly how we go about doing that. And with that, now let's get into any questions you may have.
Minister, what is the hold-up with coming to a decision on redress? Because even a couple of weeks ago, when you made the announcement about the Lake Alice compensation, you were alluding to the fact that the Prime Minister might have more to say by about now or tomorrow about that redress scheme. I understand you've canvassed a number of options with ministers. What's the hold-up?
We have been working extraordinarily hard on a number of different things in the last few months since the tabling. If you think about what we've done for Lake Alice in acknowledging that torture took place and the $20,000 payment and the making sure that the historical inequities around the legal fees had been righted. We made sure that we've got a new Crown Response Office, a functional Chief Executive. We've broadly accepted the findings. And on top of that, we have this omnibus bill. We've got 4 other pieces of legislation working their way through that also include the recommendations, and we've been working really hard on recommendations. So as you can see, we have been working on an enormous amount of things. The compensation and the redress is an extraordinary complex piece of work. There will be a number of cabinet decisions that need to be made, and we will have more to say in the early part of next year.
Prime Minister, is cost a concern?
Look, our focus really has been making sure in the 3.5 months since the report was tabled, exactly as Erica alluded to, that we are doing everything we can to immediately start to make sure our systems and our operating processes ensure this doesn't happen again. Equally, I have to say, up front around the financial redress and compensation part, that there is frankly no amount of money that makes any of this okay for any of the survivors, but let's acknowledge that. The second thing I'd say is tomorrow is definitely about our apology, but thirdly I would say that redress has been happening in New Zealand for over 20 years now. What we know from the report is that we need to deliver a better redress, financial redress system, and that is serious work that has been going on and will continue to go on. And as the Minister has said, we hope to have an answer for that, say, in the early part of 2025.
Just that this government only received this final report in July, but there had been all of those recommendations about redress that were delivered to the government, the Crown as a whole, years ago. So how is it that we're still in a position where survivors are telling us that they're going to feel like this apology is hollow without that redress scheme?
Well, again, what I'd say to you is that what I can control is I've been Prime Minister now for almost 12 months. I can tell you since we engaged with the report coming into the Parliament, as you know, through June and then into July, where it was formally tabled. We immediately have formed a team of ministers that work on this regularly. We meet regularly, often many times a week, trying to work out how we can advance this and move this forward. So I appreciate that for people tomorrow. They would love to have all the answers, and I would too. But the reality is that we need to work through a very complex set of recommendations that are often quite layered and often interface with each other in quite a complex way, and it's important that we get it right. So we are moving at pace, but it's important that we listen very clearly to the report, which says, look, the current redress system has its failings. We need to understand that, but more importantly, we need to design a system that will not ultimately, doesn't matter what compensation system we put together, it won't satisfy people, and it certainly doesn't make it right in any stretch of the imagination.
Are you saying definitively that it's the complexity, not the cost?
It's actually the complexity and getting the first principles and then the follow through from there as to how we do this and how we approach this. And it's important that we do justice to it and we do it right.
Prime Minister, apologies for the black and white nature of the question, but in terms of the redress and the compensation itself, you've indicated in the past any new government funding and spending initiatives would have to be found from existing baselines or within departments. So could I just query as to is this money coming from a similar place? Will there need to be reprioritization, or will this be added onto the operating allowance?
Look, I'm not going to get into any of that because our focus is actually we've started at a different point, which is to say, look, we've got a redress system that has been in place in New Zealand now for 20 years. We know the frustrations that many of the survivors have spoken to us about that. We know we have to build a better redress system. We've started with what their feedback has been, and we're building out from there. And that's been the starting point.
Understood that. And again, apologies for the black and white nature of the question, but is there room in the operating allowance for a sizable redress sum come budget?
Well, we still have several, we still have the design of the scheme to come. We still have several cabinet conversations, and we'll work through the funding of that in due course. But for right now, you actually have to start with the first principles of what are we trying to achieve, what is appropriate for what are those first principles and how we actually build a system around them, and that's where we've started. Sorry, Joe.
What does it say about New Zealand that today, and in fact still tomorrow, we have a state care system where vulnerable people can be strip searched and where there's been a loophole that has allowed people with, I think you described it, Erica, as serious harm offences that have been able to work with children in this country, and tomorrow still will be able to.
Yeah, well, that's unacceptable, and that's why we're moving at great speed to say what are the things that we can very quickly remedy and should have been remedied. All we can deal with is what we deal with today. And let's be clear. There's lots of things to be very, very proud about in New Zealand's history, but we also have to confront the ugliness in it as well, and this is one of those moments. And so the reality is we start with what we have, and we are doing everything we can now, after 6 years, after 16 chapters, after 3,000 pages, after 138 recommendations, a huge amount of complexity, 2,400 people giving their stories. We digest that, and as big and as overwhelming and as complex as it feels, and it is at times, we have to find a way through that, and we have to lead with our values, and we have to lead with our instincts, and also with good principles.
Some survivors have argued that because the Commission of Inquiry didn't look into the justice system or the police handling, do you think that the scope sort of missed a trick there, or should have been wider? Or are you sort of comfortable with where it's come to?
I would just say, look, we live in a world that's not perfect. The Royal Commission of Inquiry was focused on the 50 years up until 1999. The very first thing we should do is, after 6 years, after 2,500 people almost telling their stories, we have a responsibility to deal with that. And so let's start there, and let's deal with that appropriately. And that's what we're going to do.
I think there would be true accountability.
Sorry?
Those two examples of the strip searches and the loophole, they sit within the OT Act, presumably. Have they been issues that have been brought in the last 12 months to the Minister? Are they issues that the government has been aware of and has had the ability to change before now but chosen not to?
Yeah, look, I can only speak to the one regarding the core children's workers, and it has been something that has been on our radar. It's not been something that's been particularly easy to change. It looks like a relatively straightforward thing. It's actually quite technical, so we've been working for a number of months on making sure that we can actually implement this, and now we're able to do it, but it's taken... well, because this is predominantly around Kiwis who've lived overseas for a period of time. So migrants coming in automatically have to have a police check. This is for Kiwis who are here, who've lived overseas for a period of time. So being able to access police records from countries particularly that it's not easy to do it through, it may have been a long time ago, so we've had to work through all those issues and get an idea of the scale of the potential issue. And make sure that we are able to do it in a certain time frame. For example, we weren't able to implement it immediately because people aren't able to access their records immediately. So we've had to work through a number of technical issues, but I'm confident where we're at is a good place.
Is it going to have an impact on the workforce, do you think?
the advice that I've had from my officials is that they don't think that this will affect a huge amount of people. It's quite limited, but frankly, if it's one person and one child, that's enough. And so that's why it was important.
And I think, as you point out, Joe, I mean, in 2024, these are the standards that we need to have in place, and just assuming it's fine, she'll be right, isn't good enough. And so we have to constantly be constructively dissatisfied with our processes, and this won't all be perfectly resolved either. We're going to have to continually keep working at it. And so where there are opportunities to improve our safeguarding and our protection of children, we have to continue to do that work.
Prime Minister, just
Sorry, Tom,
to Joe's question, obviously removing strip searches, but in the bill itself, you're still talking about situations where there would be pat-down searches required in some instances. In what circumstances would a pat-down search of a child be required?
Sure, I can take that one. Look, there are always instances where we need to keep children safe, and I think the Royal Commission of Inquiry had many stories of where there were violence between young people in certain instances, and we need to make sure that we are keeping them safe. And there will always be a need to make sure that there isn't contraband. Now, in this bill, it talks about personalised search plans, which means we're being very focused on how we do it, when we do it, who is doing it, and that it is made very clear in advance with that young person that this is what's going to happen.
So just returning to compensation, will that be part of budget 2025?
Yes, it will need to be, yes.
That will be a line item in there?
Yes. And there's spending that may even be needed to keep moving through the process before we get to budget as well. But look, I mean, we will deal with those issues and the funding side of it. What's important for us is the design, and given all the feedback we've had from the redress design group, that's what we're trying to digest right now.
In the design, are you still negotiating over who will be covered? Because there are sort of a number of recommendations in the report as to whether family or whānau of those who've passed in the meantime waiting for redress would be eligible to get that redress. Is that something that Cabinet has come to agreement on yet?
That's there are a range of ongoing conversations. Eligibility is obviously one of them. Yep.
Minister Stanford, you've obviously been working on this for quite some time. Can I just ask your reflections ahead of tomorrow, how you're feeling right now, how this is all personally sitting with you?
Thanks for thinking of me, Jason. I'm extraordinarily nervous, actually. I met with a number of survivors this morning, and they are extraordinarily emotional. It's going to be a huge day for them, and I want to make sure we get it right tomorrow. We have been poring over every little detail tomorrow to make sure we have all of the supports in place, that we get everything right. We learnt some lessons from the tabling, that we don't want to make those mistakes again. And so we have been extraordinarily busy in the last little while to make sure tomorrow goes as well as it possibly can, because it is a huge day. It's not only the last 6 years of the Royal Commission, but actually many of these people have been fighting for decades, for their whole lives, to get to the point where the Prime Minister will apologise and acknowledge them, and it is hugely significant. And so I want tomorrow to go really well, as I think everyone does.
What did the survivors tell you this morning? What ahead of the apology tomorrow? What was their message to you, and subsequently, what was your message to them?
Actually, as always, the very first thing out of their mouths was asking how I was doing, and it's extraordinary, given what they've been through, that their first question is, "Minister, how are you doing?" And that has been, a theme of my engagements with survivors, where they always ask how I'm doing, which is extraordinary. But they're nervous about tomorrow. They know the significance of it. And as I say, they've been waiting for decades for this apology, and it will be enormously significant to them.
Prime Minister, did you or your office have any hand in advising the Speaker against allowing newsroom journalist Aaron Small to cover tomorrow?
Well, look, my team and I think staff from other offices raised their concerns with newsroom about the behaviour of the journalists. Newsroom essentially didn't take too much action on that, and as a result it was raised with the Speaker. Obviously the Speaker will make their own decisions about that, and I'm comfortable with whatever the Speaker decides.
Have you heard the journalist asking tough questions?
Well, no, I don't think it's about tough questions. It's actually about some other issues which were raised with the media outlet directly themselves. What we're talking about is, if it was all about tough questions, frankly, none of you would be in this room because you ask tough questions each and every day. So we don't mind about tough questions. It was personally about personal behaviour.
Did you find his questioning of you to be unfair or aggressive?
There's a number of issues that have been raised from not just my team, but also from staff from other offices as well that were reflected in conversations with Newsroom, and as a result, that's up to them to determine how they may want to handle that behaviour. But for us, ultimately, whatever the Speaker decides is fine by me.
Right. Here's a softball for you, Prime Minister. You've made it clear again. You've reiterated that the Treaty Principles Bill will not proceed.
Yep.
Can you tell us if there's anything in that bill that you like or what you dislike most about it?
No, there isn't anything I like.
So the whole thing to you is a complete waste of time?
I didn't support it in opposition. Our party didn't support it in opposition. As I've said many, many times before, we've come to a compromise. Neither National or ACT got what they wanted. We are supporting it to first reading, but there'll be no support from the National Party beyond that. We won't be changing our mind. Sorry, Jamie. Sorry, Jamie.
The Greens want a conscience vote for the Treaty Principles Bill. Would you support that?
No, we have a coalition agreement and a commitment that we need to uphold and honour, and we will.
Why not letting the MPs voice their own opinion?
Because we're in an MMP environment. It's a modern MMP environment. It's a maturing one. It means that our parties, when they have a mandate to form a government, as the National Party did, we need to work with other parties to do exactly that. And this is what we've decided to do in our coalition agreement, and it reflects that. But as I said, we won't be supporting it beyond the first reading.
Sorry.
Sorry?
What do you make of the depth of feeling amongst some of the protesters taking part in the Hikoi at the moment?
Yeah, look, I understand it. There's immense frustration in Māoridom around this Treaty Principles Bill, and I understand why, and I get that. But equally, as I've said, we are supporting it to first reading, and it won't be supported beyond that. Claire?
Have you had any, just still on the Hikoi, have you had any briefings on the plans for when they hit Auckland, and do you have a message for those on the Hikoi?
Yeah, look, I mean, my key message really is that, we want all New Zealanders to have the right to a peaceful protest. It's really important to me. We're expecting a large crowd. I certainly would urge everyone involved to stay safe and to be safe. I certainly, as I said before, I understand the depth of feeling from Māori around the Treaty Principles Bill. I think some of them are fearful that we will change our mind. We will not be changing our mind. We will not be supporting it at second reading. But my real desire is, look, everyone has a right to protest legally and peacefully, and importantly, we want them to stay safe.
Have you given any thought to whether or not you will go out and meet them or accept a delegation from the Hikoi once they get to Wellington to come and talk to you?
Personally, I'm really open to that, but we'll wait and see where it gets to.
Sorry, can I just follow up with that? You're personally open to going in and addressing the Hikoi when it arrives at Parliament?
Yeah, or meeting representatives from the Hikoi, but we'll work our way through that in due course. Yep.
Do you think that you or one of your ministers will actually go out there to speak? There'll be an opportunity for representatives from various different political parties to go out there and speak. Will the National Party or the government be one of them?
Look, again, we'll work our way through that. As I said, I'm open to it, but we'll see where we get to.
Prime Minister, you've said that nothing about the bill that you like. There's nothing about the bill that you like. You're not letting the conscience vote. Your name is going to be on record as voting for that bill. How does that make you feel?
Well, as I've said many, many times before, we live in a mature MMP environment, just like we see throughout Western Europe. You have a number of parties come together to form a government. In our case, our coalition government has massive alignment around the economy, around health and education, around law and order, all that good stuff. But you also have to acknowledge that each party has different issues that it wants to prosecute and to aerate in government. And as a result, that's why we do coalition agreements. That's why we come to coalition government. We're not in a first-past-the-post system inside an MMP environment. We're in an MMP environment, and it's maturing. And so as a result, parties, if you think about the parties that are represented in Parliament today, 6 parties, they have 6 quite different positions, talking to New Zealanders that they represent, and they are entitled to put their views forward. In this case, we've come to a position where The National Party did not campaign on this bill. The National Party did not support this bill before the election. We do not like this bill. We will not be supporting it. Equally, for the ACT Party, a full-scale national referendum is really what they would like to have achieved in it. We've come to a compromise. This is the compromise. I get it. There'll be people that will be frustrated on all sides of that debate about that conversation. But this is a modern MMP environment coming to life in New Zealand several decades after it was formed. And as I've said, we have a policy to move it through to first reading, and then beyond that, we will vote it down.
What do you think it would do to the coalition relationship, especially with ACT, if you were to go out and address that heavily?
I haven't thought about that, and frankly, we will do after it's been supported at first reading. Parties are free to do what they wish to do around the bill.
Do you have any regrets?
Are you worried that the division that is caused here could harm the National Party vote?
Well, I'm not. Actually, that's not my consideration. My view has been from the very beginning, as I said before the election, is that I think this bill, we don't support it because we think it is divisive. And, we're proud of the Treaty of Waitangi. Yes, we've had to grapple with it as a country over many decades. We'll continue to grapple with it as we go forward. But the reality for us is, in the National Party, this is the position we've got to.
Minister, what advice have you received, if any, about the risks or the consequences of not having statutory powers to search visitors, staff and others going into youth justice residences?
Well, this omnibus bill is putting that in place, right?
So what has been have you been advised on not having that?
You'll need to direct those questions directly to Minister Chua. Although I'm the coordinating minister, I don't have those individual details. You'll need to put that to her.
To Joe's question earlier, you mentioned that there would be a limited number of people impacted by the aspect around the overseas workers,
yes.
Or people coming from overseas rather. Have you got a number?
I may do. I'll have to go back and have a look. I can't remember off the top of my head, and I don't have it on me. But they did say it was likely to be limited in their estimations.
Prime Minister, reflecting on.
Sorry, Thomas.
Has Cabinet decided on a Crown Observer for Wellington?
Minister Brown will make announcements about that shortly.
So you have decided on who's to be appointed as Crown Observer for
Again, I'll let Minister Brown talk to that very shortly.
How soon is shortly?
Shortly.
Prime Minister, as you...
Simeon shortly.
Just as all the hikois converge in the major centres across the country, as you sit in the House and listen, well, you won't be at the first reading, but as you sit in question in time and hear a lot of the criticism that the opposition puts against you, watching all the media coverage about this, is there any point where you've had any sort of regret around accepting this as a clause in the coalition agreement?
No, this is the reality of a modern MMP environment. If I talk to my counterparts living as Prime Ministers in Western European countries, of which I've spoken to several of them about how coalitions work in their domains, they have very similar systems to us. This is quite normal, and I tried to say that at the very beginning when we formed our government. We're doing something unique. We have a three-party coalition. Many countries in Western Europe have four-party coalitions. They might have 6 parties. Some even have 11 in parts of other coalition environments around the world. So, this is the reality of the system that the New Zealand public have voted for and supported and said that's the system we expect you as politicians to operate within. We want to have governments that have reflections and representations from lots of different perspectives. We find the common ground that we can agree upon, acknowledging that there are differences. There are things the National Party will want to do that the either ACT or New Zealand First won't want to do, and vice versa. But that doesn't make us, just because it doesn't need to be a monolithic, single first past the post view of the world. A coalition government, quite rightly, when you go and operate and look at how it works in other parts of the world, it's quite normal that parties will have their pet things that they are very fixated and focused on that will be different from their coalition partners. And it's about having a maturity to be able to progress those different elements that are important to the other parties in those coalition governments.
Are you not worried about upsetting David Seymour by calling this one of his, quote, pet things?
No. I mean, it's just the reality of how it is. I mean, there are things that are important to the National Party that David Seymour would say that are not important to him. And that's perfectly legitimate and perfectly reasonable. But what you can see is you can see a coalition government that I think a year into it, people would say is actually really stable, actually has been working incredibly well together, has used the combined talents of the individual ministers to put them on the right assignments to actually deliver for New Zealanders. And so, as I come close to the 12-month mark, hopefully 12-year in due course, but 12 months for now, I can tell you I feel incredibly proud of actually that we have assembled a three-party coalition government. Yes, it's new and it's different for New Zealand, but it's actually what New Zealanders have asked us to do by voting for the MMP system time and time again. And we are making it work, and we are I think we're doing it in a very mature way, in a very, and the government is cohesive and coherent.
Prime Minister, is it a mature approach to rule out supporting the bill at the second reading after you don't know what the public consultation will be on this bill? There could be amendments to the bill, for example, that make it easier to pallet. Is that a mature way to approach this?
Well, again, our view is that we have not supported this bill from the very beginning. We see no need for it. It's not something the National Party will be supporting from here. So I appreciate there's an aeration through a public, through a select committee process where the public can engage on all sides of that debate, and that gives the aeration of the issue that I suspect the ACT Party would like to participate. They'd obviously like more and to drive it into a full national referendum. But as I said, we're going to vote it down in the second reading, and I suspect if the opposition parties do the same, then it won't be a law.
How have you found dealing with David Seymour on this? Because publicly he's called you anti-democratic. He's I'm trying to look for a word that describes his behaviour other than pretty. How have you found him behind the scenes?
Well, look, I mean, I think, you come to politics and you're in the people business, right? And there are lots of personalities and there are lots of parties and there are lots of policies that everyone comes to this place with, a set of views around. And so actually how you coherently get first and foremost, you would have asked me the same question about dealing with people in the National Party caucus, 3 or 4 years ago in our dysfunction period. We've pulled that team together and we're... Sorry?
Is this a dysfunction?
No, it's not. No, it's not. But it's about the reality. I'm trying to give you an insight into, you asking me a question as the leader of a coalition government, how I think about getting the best out of the team that I have and the people that I have. And I'm very, very proud of ACT ministers, New Zealand First ministers, National Party ministers, who are actually working incredibly coherently and cohesively behind the scenes together. We're working through issues where we will have differences, but we deal with that and we have processes to deal with that in a calm, mature, there's no histrionics, there's no screaming, shouting, ranting, raving. It's all very sorted, and we work our way through the issues and potential conflicts along the way. So, as we should, right? That's what the New Zealand people expect us to do.
Are you confident that New Zealanders are happy with the principles of the treaty as they stand, how they have been arrived at, and how they are applied within our society?
Well, there will be a range of views across New Zealand about the Treaty of Waitangi, as there has been for decades. Well, as I say, as there has been for decades. There's a range of views around the principles as well. But what I'd say to you is that the Treaty of Waitangi has been with us from the founding of this great country. It's going to continue to be with us. We have wrestled with it, we have grappled with it, but it has enabled the Crown and Māori to work together and work our way through very complex and very difficult issues. And I would just say to you, if you look at other examples of race relations around the world, as imperfect as our history has been, this has served us incredibly well, the ability to continue to engage on difficult, complex and challenging issues.
And what about the treaty principle bill would stop that happening in future?
Well, from my point of view, as I said to you, it's not something we support. I think it's a very simplistic, my view, a very simplistic interpretation of the Treaty of Waitangi that has served us, I think, incredibly well. And to simplify it down in the way through a piece of legislation like this, I think is a disservice to the treaty. Personal view.
Will incarcerated people be able to watch the apology in prison?
That's an excellent question. I mean, it will be available on Parliament TV, so if they have access to Parliament TV, then they will be able to watch it, but it's not something that I've asked about.
Okay, Joe, last question. Sorry, let's go to Joe. Sorry, Joe.
I have a couple if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
In terms of the summit, do you think that the focus might have shifted a bit, or at least the conversations that you'll have in the various bilaterals that you'll have while you're there might have shifted as a result of President Donald Trump coming in, and how do you think that's going to play out, I guess, at the APEC summit and any conversations around that?
Yeah, look, to be honest, Joe, I'm not sure. It'll be my first APEC, as you know. I've attended, obviously, a lot of different international fora that have different focuses and orientations. This has obviously got more of an economic bent around it in particular. I appreciate, both candidates for president in the US and President Trump had policies they went to the election with. As to actually what gets implemented and how that gets implemented, that's all to see. But in fairness, there's enough other regional issues that and global issues that we need to talk about a number of conflicts that are happening around the world, as you know.
What would your message to President Biden be if you managed to sit down with him while you're over there?
Oh, look, just an acknowledgement, thanking him for his service. Certainly in his era, I think there was some very good, some good progress made throughout the Indo-Pacific region. I think about the relationship strengthening between Japan and Korea and Northeast Asia alongside the US, and the work that has been useful with respect to North Korean sanctions in particular. I think about we've seen more US engagement in the Pacific Islands, which has been a good thing. Whether it's the current or an incoming administration, the American relationship is important to us. It's a long-standing one, a really important one. We stand up for a set of values, as you know. We have lifted our intensity in the Indo-Pacific region. We take a leadership role, partnering with our friends in the Pacific Island nations, and we hope and will expect and continue to work with the Americans across the region.
That answer flows nicely to if you sit down with President Xi Jinping, what will the message be there?
Well, very consistent. It's again a long-standing relationship for over 50 years. It's one that we are incredibly proud of as well, because we have been able to obviously build out to our largest trading partner. It's gone from $2 billion to $38 billion worth of two-way trade since the Free Trade Agreement in 2008. We still think there are huge areas of where we can cooperate as two countries around climate change, people-to-people connections, energy, renewables, and obviously a lot of export-import type activity as well, trade activity. We also acknowledge up front, and as I did with Premier Lee and would do with President Xi, that we will have differences, and where we have them, we call them out, we talk about them with each other, publicly, privately, consistently, predictably, and so that will continue. But for us, for New Zealand, as you know, we are working incredibly hard to re-energise and to lift the intensity of all of our relationships in a bilateral sense and through different regional and global forum as well.
Do you anticipate the change of the US President will alter that bilateral that you potentially have with President Xi Jinping as well, though?
I don't think so. I think, from a New Zealand point of view, we have an independent foreign policy. We want to advance and deepen relationships with many countries and each individual country, and we will continue to do exactly that. Okay, thank you, team. Have a good rest of the day. We'll see you tomorrow.